Hello guys, this is Scott here and welcome to another historic video, and in this one we're having a look at two very wet and thundery months that were August and October 1960. Now these were two months that followed on from a very long period of warm weather, like what above average temperatures I should say, and they saw a dramatic flip to quite cool and wet conditions, and there were some major thunderstorms about in these, so it'd be quite an interesting one to have a look at. It's always one that's quite intrigued me, this, when I've looked back through the data. So just before I get started, I just need to say that there's three sites I use for these videos. The first is the Historical Archive at wetherzentral.de. They provide the charts that I use in these videos, and also I'd like to shout out to Trevor Harley's personal weather website and the Historical Monthly Archives at the Met Office. Without those two information sites, I won't be able to do these videos at all, so a big thank you to them. So to put a bit of context in, we're going to start off on the 1st of June 1960. And apart from August and October, which I've already mentioned, I don't really plan to look in the other months in too much detail. We're mostly going to flick through them apart from when something interesting comes up. So we're just starting off on the 1st of June 1960 to give a bit of context. And June 1960 was a much warmer than average month. It has a central England temperature of 16.1. So that's really quite a warm June, especially considering this is the 60s we're on about. The 60s were a notoriously cool decade, and many of the winters were cold, and many of the summers were really quite poor. And this month is actually the last of 17 consecutive warmer than average months. That of course covers the previous winter and the previous summer in 1959. That was really quite a special summer. Definitely a video for another day. But we're at the end of this spell, and we start off June 1960 in quite a warm and settled pattern actually. So through the 1st and into the 4th and the 7th of June, we generally have high pressure fairly close to the country. Through the 10th and the 13th, we do set up a bit more of a cooler and more unsettled interlude. And at the time, it does bring quite a dramatic change, you know. They've been used to some fairly warm weather recently, since around the middle of May. So a bit of a change there. But it doesn't last long actually, because as we go to the 16th, we build high pressure back through the country. And interestingly enough, this is actually the warmest spell of the summer that's about to set up. Because actually as we go through the 16th and into the 18th, we build that high pressure through and we drag up hot air from France and Spain. And then we actually record 32 degrees on this day at Witton in Cambridgeshire. So that's actually the hottest temperature of this summer. And it's actually a bit of an indication of potentially what's to come through the rest of it. Usually when you get the hottest temperatures in June, it usually means that July and August aren't particularly good. But through the 19th and into the 20th, we keep that warm air around us. And the warmth actually becomes fairly widespread at this time. In fact, on the 22nd, we record 28.9 degrees at Morecambe and 28.3 degrees at Rhyl on the north coast of Wales. So some really quite widespread hot weather. Was it a sign, of a hot summer to come? Unfortunately not. I think we can tell that from, what I've just said. But we get the first taste of these storms, if you like, overnight 22nd and into the 23rd of June. You can see that we push low pressure into that heat. So it's a classic breakdown from a hot spell, this. And this gives the first major thunderstorms of this spell. So a bit of a taster really of what's going to come later on. And in fact, overnight the 22nd and into the 23rd of June, there's 8 hours of continuous thunder across much of the West Midlands. So some really prolonged thundery weather. And in fact, the 23rd itself was a very thundery and convective day. In fact, we have 100 millimetres of rain in a thunderstorm, at Dunstew Manor in Oxfordshire, and that was over the course of 5 hours, as well as 75 mm of rain across parts of Suffolk. So some really widespread storms. And in fact, across Woodhampton, sorry, is that it? Yeah, Woodhampton in Berkshire, across 5 hours, we actually have 7,000 lightning strikes. So some really dramatic storms there. In fact, 2 people were killed in these storms, so really quite major and disruptive weather here. But as we go through the rest of June, so through the 24th and into the 25th, that high pressure temporarily does build back through. So through the 27th and into the 30th, so where we finish off June, and we do settle things down for a time. But that isn't going to last actually, because as we go into July 1960, that's going to dramatically change now, and we're going to flip to much cooler and wetter weather. So July 1960 has a central England temperature of 15.1, so it's a lot cooler than the June we've just had, which is usually quite unusual for summer months. Usually July and August are the hottest months, and then June's usually a bit cooler than them. So to see July cooler than June is usually a bit of an indication of what kind of month it's going to be. And in fact, over the Pennines in this month, there was rain every day of this month, so it's really quite a grim one. And for some monthly statistics, there was 303 mm at Darwin in Lancashire and 235 mm across a lot of Dartmoor, so it's really quite a poor month. Though interestingly, not across Scotland, it was actually a drier than average month up there, which is something you often see in some of these poor summer months. So there on the 1st, you can see that high pressure is starting to collapse away, and as we go into the 4th, you can see that's moving away, and we're bringing low pressure in off the Atlantic. And so we're getting rid of that warm, dry weather now, and we're bringing cooler and more unsettled weather through into the 7th, and we bring a big deep autumnal low through. In fact, on the 6th, I've not got the charts for this day, but on the 6th we have 75 mm of rain in Sledburn in Yorkshire, so some very, very wet weather off this. And actually, if you look at the charts there on the 7th, you can see that heights are starting to rise to the north, so across Greenland and towards Svalbard and the Barents Sea. So when you see that, that's a very bad sign in the summer if you like warm and dry weather. Northern blocking's often a sign of pretty poor weather in the summer. So again, a bit of an indication of where things are going there in July 1960. And as we go on into the 9th and the 11th of July, again, we're just bringing more deep low pressures through the country. In fact, Trevor Harley on his site, he mentions that there was 5 notoriously autumnal lows that come through in this month. So it's really the exact opposite of summer. That goes on into the 13th and the 15th. We keep low pressure around the country. Through into the 18th, again, another deep autumnal low pressure. And before on the 20th, we do try to throw a bit of a ridge up there, so perhaps a day or two where it does calm down slightly across parts of southern England. But it doesn't last, because through the 22nd and into the 24th of July, again, the next areas of low pressure are queuing up in the Atlantic. Through the 26th and again onto the 28th, just generally poor weather, and this is of course what you consider to be high summer. So when you're seeing weather like this, it's very often, to get weather like this in high summer, it's usually a sign that you've got a pretty poor summer. And into the 31st there, so again, we keep things unsettled. So a classic front-loaded summer this is, where you get the best weather in June, and then through July and August it deteriorates. And that takes us into August 1960, which is of course the first of the 2 focal months of this video. In August 1960 was a notoriously thundery month. In fact, it's one of the most thundery months on record in this country. In fact, there was thunder every day somewhere in this country, on every day apart from the 11th and the 12th. So 29 out of 31 days saw thunderstorms somewhere. So that's really quite an indication, of what kind of month this really was. Now the Central England temperature was 15.0, so it's actually a poor summer month if you like it warm and dry. And that's unusual actually, because you often think of a lot of thundery months to often be much warmer than average, especially in the summer. But no, this one wasn't. It's cooler and it's wetter than average, so it's really, quite a poor summer month in that respect. And really the storms get off right from the beginning. So there on the first we have a slack area of low pressure across the country, and this is where you tend to see the difference in pattern between July and August. Of course, in July we had those really deep autumnal lows, which brought it quite wet and quite windy. And now in August, the lows are a lot more slack, so they allow, more in the way of convective weather to develop. So instead of, frontal rain, even though we do see it, you more get convective, thundery and showery type rain. So it starts there on the first. And as we go through into the second, we get some major thunderstorms breaking out in that. In fact, there's 41 millimetres of rain across Southsea, and 85 millimetres in Monkmoor across a lot of Shropshire, as well as 82 millimetres in just 2 hours at Old Malden in Surrey. So some really widespread thunderstorms there, as well as 36 millimetres of rain at Thorney Island. So really nowhere was immune from these storms in the early part of August 1960. Through the third, we keep that slack low pressure nearby, so again some big thunderstorms develop on this day, mainly again across a lot of England. Through the fourth and into the fifth, again some big storms. Into the sixth and the seventh, we get some severe thunderstorms across a lot of the Midlands, and into East Wales. In fact, there was 75 millimetres at Shrewsbury on this day, so again dropping a lot of copious rainfall. So when you get these storms, you really know about it. And that takes us into the 8th, and again you've got the next frontal system getting ready to come in on the 8th. And it's not so much thunderstorms at this point now, it's actually more in the way of frontal rain. In fact, across a lot of southern England between the 9th and the 11th of August 1960, there was 40 hours of continuous rain, and that dropped to 125 millimetres of rain at Brighton, which was the greatest amount across a 3-day period since 1877 in that area. So really exceptionally wet. And again, across a lot of northern areas, I should say that there were thunderstorms about. So again, nowhere is immune from these, these extraordinary downpours. Through the 10th, and again we've got that front stretched out across a lot of southern England. The Isle of Wight was also badly hit on this day. Before on the 11th, again, the next area of low pressure's coming in. So again, that's going to bring a renewal of the pattern through the 12th and into the 13th. Again, there was severe storms across a lot of Wales this time. In fact, Harlech, Gwynedd, again recording another big storm. And through the 13th and into the 14th of August, those spread east again. So now there's 56 millimetres at Cleethorpes in Lincolnshire. So again, more extraordinary downpours. Again, where you see them, you certainly know about it. And the thundery period just continues through the 15th and into the 16th. Again, there's just no respite, just thunderstorms breaking out left, right and centre. Though, as I said, again, a bit drier across Scotland at this time. Through the 17th and the 18th, again, more big thunderstorms breaking out. In fact, on this day, there was a 1 kilometre high water spout off the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. So again, more severe convective weather and more thunderstorms again across the southern areas of England. So again, it just carries on. Through the 19th and into the 20th of August, again, we tried to bring a bit of a ridge through there on the 20th, so a bit of a respite for southern England. But into the 21st, you can see the next area of low pressure winding itself up in the Atlantic. And actually what this does for a time is brings more in the way of warmer weather. So we get a push into the mid-20s across a lot of southern England, which is pretty mediocre. It's certainly nothing compared to what we get in a lot of recent summers, but still, you can't complain at one day. At least it's one day where it has calmed down a bit. But that doesn't continue last, because as we go into the 22nd and the 23rd, again, we're turning things more unsettled. This time on the 24th of August 1960, the focus of the rain and the deluges shifts from England and Wales actually up to Scotland and Northern Ireland now, so they get their turn. In fact, on the 24th of August, there was a weather front spread out across a lot of Northern Ireland, and we actually had 150 millimetres of frontal rain in Coleraine. So again, it just shifts all over the country, and this caused some extensive flooding across the Londonderry area of Northern Ireland. So again, it just carries on. And overnight, 24th and into the 25th of August, again, that front just moves over into Scotland and it brings the deluge to there now. So widely across Scotland, there's 50 millimetres on this day, the 25th of August, as well as 91 millimetres at Forres on the Moray coast. I nearly said Norway then for some reason. So again, it just continues on. There's absolutely no break from it. Through the 26th, and again we get a renewed push of thunderstorms across southern areas. In fact, there was golf ball sized hail on the Isle of Jersey this time, and this destroyed a tomato crop. So again, really nowhere is escaping from these storms. Through the 27th and into the 28th, it just goes on. And really, that takes us through the end of August. So the 29th, 30th, and into the 31st of August, we just keep those thunderstorms nearby. So that ends it for the meteorological summer. So you can see that really the summer was nothing to write home about at all. We had some decent weather in June, but then it all went down the pan in July and August, if of course warm and dry is what you like. So as I said, very much a classic front-loaded summer. And that's actually now going to take us into the autumn as well. So as we start September 1960, again September 1960 was another wetter than average month. Again, across England there was 150% of the average rainfall. But interestingly enough, again, it was drier across Scotland again. So for now, Scotland does miss out on the flooding and the heavy rain. In terms of temperatures, it has a central England temperature of 13.1, so it's about average, but I suppose you could say that is on the cooler side. So generally another cool and wet month to start off the autumn of 1960. And again, we're going to generally skip through the charts with this. So through the 3rd and into the 5th of September, we bring low pressure through, and actually we try to get a ridge of high pressure here around the 5th of September. So just for a couple of days it does turn a bit drier. And you can see that ridge there on the 8th of September. And I'd imagine this actually pushed up some fairly warm air. So probably low to mid 20s at this time. Not fantastic, but compared to the deluges we've had through July and August, it can't be argued against really. But that ridge doesn't really last, because as we go through the 11th of September and on into the 14th, again you can see the Atlantic's trying to come back. You can see the jet stream, which is that black line, is dipping back to the south, and it's bringing more low pressure systems through the country. So we're bringing that rain back through the 17th, a deep area of low pressure across England, into the 20th, and the 23rd, high pressure trying to have a go there. So really, there's not much of a change. We do get a bit more in the way of high pressure, but still things generally unsettled. Through the 26th, and actually as we go into the latter days of September, again we're going to set up that pattern that's going to take us into October, because through the 27th and into the 28th of September we're bringing low pressure up from the southwest, and this causes a massive deluge across a lot of southwest England. In fact, a lot of southwest England saw 5 days of continuous rainfall starting on the 28th. So again, there's just very little respite from the flooding, and that's, as I said, that's an indication of what October's going to bring. So through the 29th and into the 30th of September, that low pressure hangs around to the southwest, again bringing copious rainfall to Cornwall and Devon. In fact, on this day, the 30th of September, Exeter is cut off by flooding. And that takes us into October 1960. And as I said, October 1960 is the second of the two focal months of this. And Trevor Harley, on his website, the first thing he describes October 1960 with is quite a month. So, you know, quite a month it really was. And you'll see that as we go through the charts. Again, it was another copiously wet month with double the average rainfall across much of the country. And again, it was also a very dull month, so there really wasn't a lot of sunshine about in this. In terms of temperatures, it's another cooler month with a CET of 10.3 degrees. So again, another chilly and thundery month. So another unusual combination there. And you can see there, October just begins where September left off, with low pressure to the south and high pressure to the north. Again, across Scotland, it was another drier than average month. So again, you know, not too bad up there. As I said, it's what you often get in some of these very wet months across southern England. So there we are on the first with that. And the heavy rain in the southwest goes on into the second, and again there's widespread flooding across much of Devon, mainly across Tynemouth and Exeter, after 175 millimetres of rain at Exeter. And this was the first of two major floods in this month, so those places really do get hammered. Furthermore, there's 60 millimetres of rain at Lyme Regis in Dorset, so it just goes on and on and on. Through the third, that low pressure gradually shifts its way north, and it actually puts the winds into a southerly, so it's really quite warm and humid in this early part of the month, despite it being a cooler month as a whole. And actually where you do get any sun breaking through, temperatures are quite widely into the low 20s, so in that respect actually not too bad. But all that's going to do again is fuel more of those torrential downpours as we head through this early part of October 1960. Through the 4th we see a wave of thunderstorms moving up across the south, so it carries on into the 5th, and actually on the 6th of October there's a major flood at Exmouth again in Devon, so that area really taking a pounding. In fact, 1,000 homes are flooded in Exmouth, so, you know, it goes on and on and on. That's all I can really say about this. And as we go into the 7th, again, more widespread storms break out. In fact, this time they shift further north, so across a lot of northern England and the Midlands, this is where we see the storms on this day. In fact, there was a severe thunderstorm at Horncastle in Lincolnshire with, get this, 184 millimetres of rain falling between midday and 6 o'clock in the evening. So that's 184 millimetres, so double the monthly average in just 6 hours. That really is unprecedented. And actually the Met Office article quotes that the majority of that actually fell in 3 hours, and I believe this day brought the rainfall record for 3 hours. So, you know, absolutely extraordinary rainfall here, and 100 homes were flooded in Horncastle, as well as many shops, and unfortunately there was one man killed on this day by being swept away by a flash flood. So it does just go to show that even though we find this weather interesting, it does come at really quite a cost, as we can see across Devon and again, where people are unfortunately getting trapped in flash floods. And then there's no respite into the 8th of October. In fact, again, the thunderstorms break out widely. And in fact, there's 103 millimetres of rain at Luxborough in Somerset and 87 millimetres at Danby Lodge in North Yorkshire. So those thunderstorms, very widespread across England. There's just no respite, that's all I can say. Through the 9th, another deep autumnal low crosses the country, so bringing more rain yet again to the places that really don't need it. Into the 10th, before finally by the 11th we do start to bring a slight ridge of high pressure. So across a lot of western areas, so across Ireland and Wales, and actually thankfully into parts of Cornwall and Devon, we do start to bring, for a time, some drier weather through. What you can see as we go into the 12th, it's actually bringing a northerly down there on the 12th of October. So it's quite chilly with this actually. I'd imagine there was a lot of morning frost with this, especially where skies do manage to clear. In fact, those are the upper air temperatures there on the 12th of October. So you can see we are in cold air, well, fairly cool air I should say. So yeah, there probably was quite a lot of frost around at this time. Through the 13th and the 14th, we managed to stay a bit drier, and again we keep that slack northerly coming down. So I'd assume this is where the below average anomaly for this month comes from, this cooler interlude. But unfortunately it doesn't last, because as we go through the 15th and into the 16th of October, that high pressure slowly begins to collapse away now, and as we go into the 17th, it drags an easterly wind across the country before again by the 18th that low pressure just comes back, and we actually now turn the weather very dull. In fact, the second half of this month, the 18th to the 31st, Aberdeen sees just 12 minutes of sunshine. So really just a very grim pattern. And again on the 18th we see more widespread severe thunderstorms break out. It just goes on and on and on. Into the 19th and the 20th, low pressure hanging around the country. Into the 21st and the 22nd, you see actually diving quite a bit to the south there. Interestingly enough there, if this was a few weeks later, say if it was early December, something like that, that'd be potentially quite a snowy pattern. You see, we've got the low pressure to the south and we are dragging easterly winds off the continent. So, as I say, if this were in winter, there'd be a good chance of this being quite snowy. But unfortunately, all it's bringing in late October is more copious rainfall to the places that don't need it. Through the 23rd and into the 24th again, the Exeter area now starts to get hit by another massive deluge. Through the 25th and into the 26th, there's another flood in the Exeter area. So that's the second of two major floods in that area. And in fact, the monthly total for rain at Exeter was 314 millimetres, which I believe is nearly quadruple, the October average at the time. So just unprecedentedly wet, and will the misery ever come to an end for these people? Unfortunately not yet. Through the 27th again, the rain just spreads to other parts of the country, so again we see flash floods as rivers burst the banks by now. There's just no end to it at all. And that really takes us to the end of October, so through the 28th and into the 29th of October, we keep low pressure nearby. Again, notice it's on a southerly track as well. Into the 30th and the 31st, just no change whatsoever. And that takes us into November 1960, the final month of the autumn. Is the last month of the autumn going to bring a respite to this? Well, I'm afraid it isn't. If you can see from the chart there on the 1st of November, low pressure is again waiting in the wings. So November 1960 was again another wetter than average month, with an average of 175 millimetres across the country. And in fact, across Snowdonia in Wales, there was 624 millimetres of rain throughout November 1960. So now the flooding's going to spread to Wales. It's just going to go on and on and on. Though, interestingly, yet again, Scotland gets away with the drier weather through November. So, if you don't like the rain, for once, Scotland was the right place to be through this period. So there we are on the 1st of November, and interestingly on the 1st of November there was a tornado across parts of northwest England, and it started at Crewe in Cheshire and actually went up through into parts of Manchester in Lancashire, which it still was at that time. Greater Manchester didn't become its own county until the 70s, I think it was. So the convective weather carries on through the 2nd, a deep area of low pressure there on the 2nd. It just goes on and on and on. Through the 4th and into the 5th of November, so Bonfire Night in 1960 was a classic wet and windy one. Though with the isobars actually starting to turn northerly there, it was presumably actually quite a chilly one as well, so at least feeling somewhat seasonable apart from all this heavy rain we're getting. Through the 8th we actually get a temporary ridge of high pressure, so actually a little respite there, but it doesn't last, because as we go through the 8th and into the 11th of November, of course, Remembrance Day, the next area of low pressure is coming in down to 960 millibars there, so a really deep area of low pressure. That's a classic late autumn storm, that. Through the 14th it just continues into the 17th, and the 20th we keep low pressure generally around the country, bringing more widespread rainfall over and over again. Through the 23rd and into the 26th it just goes on and on, though we are on the cooler side of the jet there, so actually across a lot of northern hills it does actually turn a bit wintry. So perhaps one little delight as we get towards the end of it, but still generally just carrying on with that diabolical pattern into the 28th and the 30th of November. So a pretty horrific, miserable autumn following on from generally a poor summer. And so that it just goes to show you though how quickly the weather can change. As I say, we went from a long run of above average months to quite a run of cooler and wet months. So again, it's just one of those classic big changes that we often get in the UK. I mean, in case you're curious, the wet weather actually carries on into the winter, and I'm not going to show the charts for winter, but if you're a cold and snow fan, there really wasn't much weather of interest in the winter of 1960-1961. In fact, all 3 winter months were wetter than average, and in February in particular was quite a mild month. So probably the worst winter for cold and snow of the 1960s, arguably. So really not much of interest there. We just see a continuation of this pattern. But yeah, I hope you found that an interesting look at the summer and autumn of 1960, more specifically August and October. And as I say, if you've got requests for historic videos, feel free to let me know. As for the next one, I think we'll have a look at a winter next time. We've done quite a few summers and autumns recently, well, in the most recent videos I've done. So, I think next time we'll have a look at a winter to balance things out a bit. So, as I say, if you've got any good suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching this video, everyone, and I'll see you sometime soon.